So welcome back to Untermyer Gardens. Here we are in midwinter. The gardens are largely dormant, and while we don't plant any specific winter gardens here at Untermyer, we do try to make sure there's year-round seasonal interest throughout all our planting spaces. What I'd like to focus on today are semi-evergreen perennials. We may throw a few shrubs in that are really interesting at the moment as well, but these are plants that hold mainly foliage interest deep into the winter before we do our big sprig cleanup, opening up the season. Here. And I'm standing in a little grouping here, and it starts out with a Penstemon, which when it's doing its thing in the year, it grows up to 3 feet and has these great pink flowers, but right now it has this basal rosette of dark purple leaves with a little bit of green tinge in them. This is a Penstemon cultivar called Blackbeard. Just behind the Penstemon, and not quite on our list of semi-evergreen perennials, but a dwarf Nandina. This is a Nandina domestica Gulfstream that gets a nice red color through the winter and almost a full evergreen effect, but it will give us new leaves in the spring. Subtending the Nandina, we have a Heuchera. I love growing these for their year-round interest, but right now it's the most colorful thing in the garden. This is a Heuchera called Forever Red. There are tons of cultivars of Heuchera that have varying colors and venation throughout, and you can use them in all parts of the garden. And then finally we have this great little Viola. It's Viola labradorica. It can be a self-sower through the garden, but it holds its foliage with sort of a purple, maroon, almost pewter tint to it. The undersides are purple and will continue to colonize throughout the space. So I'm standing in another grouping of semi-evergreen perennial, and this one's called Euphorbia. It's Euphorbia martini, Ascot Rainbow. The Euphorbias are a great genus, so many different plants within it. You can find a plant for every condition in your garden. But what I love about these right now, they're putting on just as much of a display as they do through the entire growing season, and sort of acting a little bit like a shrub in the border. In fact, I'm standing next to a Thuja occidentalis golden globe, which is a dwarf arborvitae, and really these two plants are serving the same purpose in the landscape. Of a special note, I'd like to point out this reversion that's happening on this particular Euphorbia. You can see the original variegated selection that's been held in cultivation, and then here we have one stem that's reverting to its original expression. It's starting to lose its variegation and it has entirely green leaves. This will actually outcompete the variegated plant because it has more chlorophyll, so what we need to do is clip that off in the spring and make sure that doesn't take over the entire plant. Stepping into the borders of the ruined garden, I'm next to this Tricyrtis, which is not a semi-evergreen perennial, but it still has some really interesting seed pods on it, but it's surrounded by quite a bit of color for January. And so I'm next to this Heuchera called Black Pearl. As it's sort of flopped over in all the hard frost, this underside of the leaf becomes a real dominant color down here in this border. I'm next to an autumn fern, a Dryopteris. It's gone to its green winter look from its brilliant yellow fall look. And in the foreground, and this sort of surprised me, is a Tiarella that has no purple color in it through the growing season. It's a nice green plant with some purple venation in it, but once it had a good hard frost, it's given us some purple foliage as well. So another nice semi-evergreen moment here in the ruin garden. Still within the ruin garden, and not evergreen at all, but a grass we use throughout the garden is this Hakonechloa, macra. This is the cultivar all gold because you can grow it in deep shade. It has a deep yellow chartreusey foliage to it through the growing season, but still adds interest to the winter garden. We're looking at Heuchera Black Pearl that we've used throughout this bed, and one of my favorite ferns in the garden, certainly at the ruin garden right now, is this tassel fern. Looks just as happy and healthy as it does in the middle of the growing season, adds another texture, and this corner of the garden almost looks like a garden in the middle of January. So as much fun as it is to walk around the garden and talk about plants, I'm really looking forward to our upcoming virtual presentation. We've invited noted garden author and history and design authority Toby Musgrave, who's just written a book called Gardens, elements and styles, and we're inviting Toby to come and help us decipher all the elements here at Untermyer Gardens. Here I'm standing in the ruin garden, and I'm really curious to see how that was derived and how it fits into the global context of garden history. If you'd like to pick up Toby's book, it's also available on our registration page for the event.